Hi, I'm Glenn, and welcome to video 2. If you saw video 1, that was about sarcasm, but this video is about conflict. Conflict? Conflict, you mean like when Godzilla tears up Tokyo and everybody runs for their lives and... No, it's not quite that intense, but it's still pretty intense. You know, seriously, just saying the name conflict makes my stomach a little queasy. And while I was investigating conflict, one of the sites that I checked out even had a picture of boxing gloves hanging on a wall. And unfortunately, that's a pretty accurate visual. I think that this definition of conflict from dictionary.com fits pretty well. To come into collision or disagreement, be contradictory, at variance, or in opposition. Clash. Collision, clash. Wow, that's pretty heavy stuff. Unfortunately, conflict is part of life, and there's no way around that. And what makes it even worse is that conflict often comes out of nowhere. Not only placing us in the heat of the moment, but at the mercy of our emotions as well. So it's really a double-edged sword. So let's look at some approaches on how we may deal with conflict. Sellers, Canary, and Tafoya have organized and labeled conflict communication into 4 categories. The 4 categories are direct and cooperative, direct and cooperative, direct and competitive, direct and competitive. 3, indirect and cooperative, indirect and cooperative. And 4, indirect and competitive, indirect and competitive. So these 4 categories help to establish the level of conflict we are encountering. And it helps us to look at whether the conflict is direct or indirect. And that gives us a clue on how we can deal with the situation. Whether the conflict is indirect, or it's direct, or if it's competitive, or it's cooperative, gives us clues on where the other person is coming from and gives us some idea of how we should handle the situation and how we should respond. Let's look at the approaches one by one, as described by Abigail and Kahn. 1. The conflict behaviors associated with the indirect and competitive model are backstabbing, sabotaging, refusal to talk, shutting off discussion, lack of cooperation, lying, and denials, often referred to as the passive-aggressive approach. Wonder why? I think that was a little sarcasm in there. Next, the conflict behaviors of the direct and competitive mode include disagreement, rejection, criticism, denying responsibility, hostile demands, hostile jokes, negative mind reading, threats, and even physical intimidation. Mind reading. What's that about? Now we got psychics and fortune tellers involved in this? No, not quite. According to the article, Common Cognitive Distortions, mind reading. One common cognitive distortion is called mind reading, which is assuming you know what other people think. The article goes on to say, in small doses, mind reading is a very helpful skill. We know that certain behaviors, words, and reactions can give us clues about what someone is thinking. For instance, when we tell someone something and his or her jaw drops, we automatically assume that the other person is surprised. But the article also points out that when this is used too much or without much evidence to go on, mind reading can be problematic. And then this is termed as negative mind reading. The article gives the example of someone eating alone in a cafeteria, thinking everyone thinks she's a loser for eating alone. And the article makes the point that engaging in enough of this distorted mind reading can make you pretty miserable. Well, she probably is a loser. No, I didn't mean that. I'm just joking. More sarcasm, sorry. Actually, I've been there. I've felt self-conscious at times when I eat alone, so I can identify with that. And making assumptions about people when I don't have enough information to validate those assumptions. Moving to the more positive side of conflict approaches, we find the indirect and cooperative and the direct and cooperative. Now we're getting somewhere. The indirect and cooperative models include behaviors such as accommodating, avoiding, changing the subject, smoothing, humor, without sarcasm, Glenn, and request to talk about the conflict later. I would label the indirect and cooperative approach as a seemingly more positive approach to conflict resolution. But I say seemingly because some of the behavioral actions involved in this approach, like avoidance, accommodating, smoothing the situation over, changing the subject, etc., might not be the healthiest ways to deal with relational conflict. But, on the other hand, depending on the situation, the personalities involved, and even the timing, it might be the right approach to use. But I would advise caution in making sure that you're reading the situation correctly. Perhaps a technique like changing the subject would be the best course of action to take to prevent the conversation from becoming too heated before irreparable damage can be done. So this might be a smart move, as long as there is agreement to discuss the matter later when cooler heads prevail. Okay, so when you have a chance to calm down and really talk things over, I think this is key. Too many things get swept under the rug and they're never really forgotten. They might not be talked about again, but they're still there, round and round up here somewhere. Finally, we come to the conflict behaviors of direct and cooperative model, the direct and cooperative model, which are collaborating, compromising, expressing willingness to change, statements of understanding, wow, accepting responsibility, apology, problem solving, and metacognition. Metacommunication. That's even a new one. That's a new one for me. By the way, the term metacommunication involves nonverbal cues such as voice tone, body language, gestures, facial expression, etc., that help us convey the meaning of what we are trying to say. So it's involving a lot of nonverbal cues. And I'm sure some verbal cues as well, because it does mention voice tone. So, and we know the tone of our voices says so much that you could say, "How are you doing?" or "How you doing?" or "How are you doing?" Overall, I feel that the direct and cooperative model is the healthiest and the most productive model by far, and something to shoot for in our communicative exchanges. Although it might be the hardest of the models to implement because it requires the healthiest motives and it's the least ego-driven. Indeed, exhibiting behaviors like compromising, expressing willingness to change, accepting responsibility, and apologizing are not easy for many of us. We must not only care about the relationship, but we must also be secure in ourselves in order to express such vulnerability to another human being. With regards to conflict strategy, the thing to remember is, as Canary and Lakey point out, People make two choices regarding how they communicate to the other person in conflict. And I think this is really key. First, we decide, either consciously or unconsciously, we really decide how direct or indirect we're going to be. And second, people decide how cooperative or competitive that they will be. So, to paraphrase Shakespeare, direct or indirect, cooperative or competitive, those are the questions. And I would like to add that another pertinent question, if I may, will I choose to be healthy or unhealthy in my communication exchanges? That is the real question. Thank you. I will be performing on the weekends at Corbett Center at NMSU, and donations are welcome. Before ending, please don't say anything sarcastic. Before ending, like, oh, thank God, I want to mention John Gottman. John Gottman's 4 horsemen, which are criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. I'll say those again. Criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. And I wasn't sure what stonewalling was, but we'll get to it. Of course, according to the New Testament, the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse usher in the end times, and most of us know that. But John Gottman uses this analogy to address flawed communication styles that he believes are, in effect, devastating to relationships. And is that dramatic? Yeah. But he makes a good point. So let's see why. From the Gottman Institute, the article, The 4 Horsemen, Criticism, Contempt, Defensiveness, and Stonewalling. We have descriptions of Gottman's 4 horsemen. Okay? So I'm going to give you the descriptions of the 4 horsemen. The first horseman of Gottman's apocalypse is criticism. Criticizing your partner. Yeah, I'm sorry, this chokes me up a little because this is really valuable stuff and it's really intense, and I'm guilty of so much of this. And I do share that. The first horseman of Gottman's apocalypse is criticism. Criticizing your partner is different than offering a critique or voicing a compliment. Criticizing your partner is different than offering a critique or voicing a compliment. It is an attack on your partner at the core. Those are the things that make me chill a little inside because it's true. Because it's true. It is an attack on your partner at the core. In effect, you are dismantling his or her whole being when you criticize. Wow. Next, the second horseman is contempt. When we communicate in this state, we are truly mean, treating others with disrespect, mocking them with sarcasm, Glenn, ridicule, name-calling, mimicking, and using body language such as eye-rolling. The target of contempt is made to feel despised and worthless. The third horseman is good old defensiveness. And as the article points out, we've all been defensive. When we feel accused unjustly, we fish for excuses so that our partner will back off. Unfortunately, this strategy is almost never successful. Our excuses just tell our partner that we don't take them seriously, trying to get them to buy something that they really don't believe. Stonewalling. Stonewalling is the fourth horseman. Stonewalling occurs when the listener withdraws from the interaction. In other words, stonewalling is when one person shuts down and closes her or himself off from the other. It is a lack of responsiveness to your partner and the interaction between the two of you. Wow. And even though I wasn't sure how it was labeled, I've certainly done that one too many times, more times than I care to remember. Well, I say it's no wonder that Gottman does deem his concept the Four Horsemen, because if these behaviors don't spell doom for a relationship, then nothing does. So what can be done? Well, interestingly enough, Gottman's research suggests that it isn't necessarily the major differences that end marriages, and I agree with this. I think it's the little things that get us. But rather, it's how the couple deals with the conflict that matters. So it's not these huge things, or even, I guess he's saying even the little things, but how do we deal with them? I just have this pet theory, my pet thing, that little things, for me, are the killers. It's because they add on and they don't say anything and don't say anything, and then it blows up. But I really can relate to this, and I think that's so true. It's how we deal with our conflicts, not just with couples, but in everyday life. That's what matters. That really tells people, that tells us who we are, how we deal with things. Not what we say, but how we act. So how can we deal with these relationship disrupting horsemen? That's a tongue twister. How can we deal with these relationship disrupting horsemen? Well, let's take criticism. Overall, there is nothing inherently wrong with criticism. Constructive criticism, I mean. The operative word being constructive. But it's delivering the criticism that's the tricky part. Stating how you feel and using I statements, I statements, can be helpful in getting your point across without being accusatory. Statements like, I worry when you come home late and I'd appreciate a call, is reasonable, as opposed to, hey dummy, there's a new invention. It's called a cell phone. Your mother was right about you. You're an inconsiderate jerk. Next on the list, we have contempt. Sometimes we not only categorize our partner's flaws, but we even create a filing cabinet for them inside our head. And I have a few of those filing cabinets. So rather than dwell on their shortcomings, why not make a list of all their attributes? And hopefully the pluses outweigh the minuses. And I think in most cases they will. Now we have defensiveness. And as the article pointed out, we've all been there. We often get defensive when we feel criticized or attacked. That makes sense. One way to prevent defensiveness in others is to choose to communicate in non-attacking ways. So we must choose to communicate in non-attacking ways. Keep away from the accusatory you and your, as in you did this. This is your fault. You're the reason I'm like this, etc., 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 etc. And let's remember that when we do slip into the accusatory mode, a sincere apology like, I'm sorry, that wasn't fair, let's talk this over, can do wonders in turning a defensive situation into an open and caring exchange. Finally, we have stonewalling, aka the silent treatment. Sometimes frustration gets the best of us, and we can either clam up or storm off. That's kind of been my mode, clam up or storm off. I'm going to climb up and show you. I'm going to storm off and show you. Maybe the best way to deal with this one is patience. Let some time pass. Have a cooling off period before trying to resume the conversation. It's also important to let your partner know that although you're not ready to talk now, that you acknowledge that you will discuss the matter later. And this is also very helpful in diffusing an already tense situation. So that's crucial. That's really key. I mean, if you can't talk now, and sometimes we can't. Sometimes we got to get a break. We got to get out of there. And just let your partner know that I am not able to talk about this now, but we will talk about it later. And not like, well, we will talk about it later. But I've done that too. But we'll talk about this later. So, and although all this, this one might seem obvious, and although this one might seem pretty obvious, like I said, another thing to keep in mind is that no matter how close we are to someone, we all have different views, opinions, and beliefs. And sometimes, I choke up a little with that one. Because, yeah, it does intellectually seem obvious, but in the heart, if you're really close to someone, you feel more like they can read your mind, and they do get you all the time. And sometimes it's kind of shock when you go, whoa, wow, who's in there? I didn't see that one coming. So it's important to keep in mind that no matter how close we are to someone, we all have different views, opinions, and beliefs. And those differences must be respected. They don't necessarily have to be accepted. You don't have to own them or take them on. But we have to respect them. If the relationship is to grow and develop, then differences must be respected. They must be accepted. In effect, we must agree sometimes to disagree and realize that there's nothing wrong with that. And I think so much of this really calls for us to look at ourselves and not always assume that we're right. At least for me, that's very true. And these videos are helping me to do that. Being aware is key. If you can recognize your part in the conflict, you can make the choice to be healthier in your responses. Self-awareness is crucial. You can't control your partner. You can try, but you really can't, and it won't work, and it won't last. And you really shouldn't try, because that's pure manipulation and bound to backfire. But you can control your emotions, your words, and your actions. And, we already know that's the healthiest way to go. It seems like it's a difficult way sometimes, but it's really the easy way. In ending, borrowing from the 12-step programs, I suggest that you take your own personal inventory every night. Look over what you did during the day, where you messed up, and how you could have done better, and how you will do better next time. Most importantly, how you'll do better, how I'll do better, how we'll do better next time. The better you know yourself, the more self-aware you are, the better your chances for healthier communication and healthier relationships, period. And that's our goal, isn't it? And the stronger, more loving, and more lasting our relationships will tend to be because of our healthier communication. It's going to be a direct correlation to whatever degree, but it's going to be there. It has to be there. Different levels, different degrees, but positive change has to occur. Well, thank you for listening. Bye for now. My next video will be on self-soothing. Ooh, soothing of the self. I could use some of that. And I bet you could too. You know, I'm not really very good at that, taking care of myself. And perhaps you weren't either. And I just ran into a counselor who was reminding me how important that was. He made me promise to go look it up online. And I did. Didn't do much with it, but I looked it up. Anyway, thank you again for watching. It's been a real honor to share some of this, and I really hope you're getting something out of it. And, you know, again, the self-soothing, you know, you don't want to miss out on that one. And I hope to see you then. Thank you again. Bye-bye.